this meeting of the Shark-Cibolo Universal City Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present, that this meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. The time is now 6 o'clock. Roll call. Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to Texas, one state, under God, one indivisible.
Welcome everybody. Let me see. Not too many. Dr. Tristan, Jeff. Was it known? All your staff members. At least you got cookies tonight. About it for being here. So, guess we'll get started. The first item on the agenda is a welcome and overview. On Friday's meeting, Dr. Gibson and I usually have a meeting with his staff and Amy, and we discuss several things. Due to the overlap of the Salary and Benefits Committee and the overlap of the Budget Committee, there's so much, 80% of that is sort of the same. I was proposing and sort of notifying at the same time that we basically form those two committees, combine those two committees, and just have sort of a monthly or every other monthly budget committee with the whole board of trustees. Several reasons. One, there's an overlap. Second, we're going to have a new board member coming up here soon, and he or she will need to be onboarded. And the other issue was basically having more board members more informed about the budget process in light of, I guess, upcoming events and past events coming on. So we're all working with the same body of information. Dr. Gibson?
Yeah, so to that end, Mr. Westbrook and Ms. Strasbeck had, I guess, asked some questions, and over the weekend I just thought, well, you know what, I'll capture some of our conversation in the form of a memo so as to kick the meeting off. So hopefully you have somewhere in front of you a memo to the Board of Trustees is regarding 2019-2020 budget preparation. So the concept of collapsing the committees into a committee of the whole and working on these simultaneously, I think is wise and prudent. And I think we came about that after just looking at the, I guess, the enormity of the information that was to be shared, and it was going to go out in several different directions, and it was going to be tough to keep up with who had heard what, and is it integrated back into the full conversation. So the memo, and I'm not going to read, but I'll let everybody take this with them. So, and I know everybody knows this, but sometimes I think it's good to anchor back to it, that there are 4 major duties that the superintendent are outlined with: fiscal management, and a couple of this pretty standard stuff. I look down at number 3, purchasing practices, not that, but a cost-effective, consistency, budget implementation, clear and timely budget reports. Nothing, earth-shattering there. Then when you move down to the other 7, ensure that appropriate data is being utilized, which that's part of what we're looking at tonight. Instructional program, make sure that it aligns on number 3 with goals and targets. Number 4, I'm skipping for efficiency here, but effectiveness of operations. 5, consistent with board policy and applicable law, and make the public as aware, or it says as appropriate, which we take that to mean transparency. 6, effectiveness, efficiency, last word. 7, compensation and salary benefits. And this very last thing is real interesting, based on clearly defined goals and priorities. So to that end, if you'll flip over on the back, just right on the back, just to get it started, I'm going to propose 5 changes to our current practice, and then we'll just kind of start digging in tonight. And actually, that's probably not accurate. We're gonna dig in a little bit to INS. We've asked our financial advisors to be here. Then I would recommend that we dig in with EPP, let's say next month. And then we would dig in with staffing guidelines and salary and compensation the next month. And then we would dig in with that large expenditures the next month. And then we come back in January, February, March, and we start on the draft of the 1920 budget parameters. So currently, our current practice with our expenditure projection plan, our methodology does not include board consensus or approval of the parameters. You've got some of those in front of you tonight. And then currently, the EPP does not have a strategic link to our budget process. That is to say, we kind of just wait and see if there's money left over, and then we propose a list, and then we try to spend against that money left over. And whereas that is an approach you can take, it's not strategic in my thinking. It just kind of waits until the end of the year and see what's available and then do some spending. So the desired change that I'm asking for is the board approve the EPP, or at least reach consensus about the first 3 years of items on it, at least a 3-year snapshot out, and then the board integration of the EPP and the budget into the budget parameter process. Then regarding staffing guidelines, currently the board does not approve staffing guidelines. Occasionally, I think they may show up in a board document. I am going to ask that the board approve staffing guidelines moving forward. On salary and compensation, the SCUC currently does not have a compensation strategy, and I think you saw on that number 7, that we should have clearly defined goals. We have a compensation process, and we have a compensation plan that the board approves annually, but there's not necessarily a strategy in that plan. And we typically just ask TASB to evaluate it and compare us to the comps. But we've never really asked them to compare us to the comps with an overarching goal of being in the top decile or being in the top quartile or just being in the top 50%. So we really don't know what the board's wishes or desires are, I guess, with where we want to be with salary. So in addition, my desired change is the board adopt the annual compensation plan and we adopt a compensation strategy. And then we're gonna need to look at large expenditures. So board and senior leaders do not collectively review large expenditures. That's one of the reasons we wanna make sure that cabinet members are here. We have board meetings and we have cabinet meetings, and we really don't ever bring those together to have an integrated conversation. That's one of the reasons we want to try to do it in a workshop setting. So just a few, these are not EPP items, and we'll, moving forward, Paige will show tonight how that's 2 separate lists, 2 separate groups. But we do many things that are beyond what is required by law, and they have a cost. And so Paige will, I think, show you in a little bit what the costs are for a lot of those. We're not saying that there's good, we're not saying that there's bad in any of that, we're just trying to give a cost. It's just we're trying to quantify the cost. We'll talk about those in a little bit. I would like the desired change on the large expenditures is that by January each year, if any item is going to be considered for a cost saving measure, that we make that determination in January each year. And that's determined prior to the budget parameter process. And then with regards to efficiencies, we have them, we have quite a few of them actually, but we're not clear about what they are, and there's no collective list and they're rarely discussed. So I wanna make sure that, and Paige, you can point out where those efficiencies are in the previous committee documents, and then we can make sure that we're clear about those as we move forward. Because I think a part of what we have to do when we look at an ever decreasing budget is declare what items we already do that are major efficiencies. So for example, energy management comes to mind, our class size ratios, our low administrative ratio. Recently, we received 4.5 stars by the state's comptroller, and that's where it's pretty rare error to be in. I just don't think a lot of people realize that. What's interesting is that we got the 4.5 stars when many of our campuses were not low spending, but were average or even high spending. So in other words, all the efficiencies were at the central office level, and we'll dig into that a little bit deeper later. So those just represent, so when we were talking about these things, I think many of y'all could maybe see why to try to take these things on in individual committees and then come back together and get the whole board on board, might have been problematic. So we decided to do it just in budget workshops.
And consistent with 3, 4, and 5, and all the alignment was, Dr. Gibson and I recently had a discussion to sort of see if we could reinitiate and revive the one-on-one meetings. So I think I'm gonna ask him to sort of maybe make sure that he has a one-on-one meeting with every board of trustee before the new member, you know, is sworn in, and that way we're all on the same page, at least the current board members. So.
Can I ask you a question? With our debt service, spending down the debt service, our budget surplus, what do you want to call it?
So fund balance?
Fund balance,
Okay.
yeah. Would that be included, all those things, in using bond savings and things like that, would that be included in the large expenditures discussion or the efficiency discussion, or different? It's
No,
different
so there were two, so we have two fund balances. One is our interest and sinking and one is our
Right.
M&O. The interest and sinking part of it, you'll hear a little bit about tonight. Dwayne's gonna go through the interest and sinking part of it. Then I do think the large efficiencies, or probably more the EPP discussion, is gonna be more about the M&O fund balance. Because theoretically, we could spend against that to buy another year or two, but what we've proposed is that you can't keep doing that. You can't get this list ready and then say, okay, we're gonna go to savings to buy it, and then do that again, and then do that again. There's a point where that has to be built into the budget.
Yeah.
And that's what we're proposing at some point, either this year or next year. We've just gotta build
Well,
those in.
that comes under the discussion of you know, what kind of fund balance do we want to have? Do we want
Correct.
a 75-day or 90-day or
Correct.
60-day or whatever it is we decide we're going to do that
That's
fits our needs?
So I think EPP is probably the discussion where that is gonna lock in, because that is where where you're gonna get the resources to do that until you get it, put in the budget.
And I know we're certainly defined in how we can spend any bond savings. It has to be for something in that particular package. But I think we need to have a little bit more discussion at some point in time about how that is resolved. And
At the,
you know, I'm not sure we're looking at everything that's possible with some of our bond savings, you know, so that's the thing. And I know we will have future bonds and we will have savings.
yeah, so we've gotta be really careful to keep those two conversations completely separated. So the bond savings are just to buy down.
No, I agree.
Then the M&O savings, we can talk about EPP.
Yeah.
We could not use bond savings towards EPP.
No, I know that.
Well,
that's
I'm
what
not saying,
It's
I'm just saying for the good
totally
of the group.
defined, you know, and I think if anybody is not clear about that, they need to be.
So and then this is kind of I'm gonna say this, then we're gonna need to get, because we're headed down in the weeds, and this is a high level.
A total long conversation, I was just curious.
Yeah, so the conversation about EPP, I would recommend, if you look, you know, at those 4 or 5 items on the back of the memo, I think I would recommend coming in October and digging deep on EPP. So you always touch base on all of the topics that are out there, but then we come in pretty deep.
We're
So
all intertwined too.
right, and you can have one conversation without having the other one, but the primary purpose of the October would be to dig deeper into EPP. For example, tonight you're going to see, here's a chart and it has these items listed down one side, and then here's the rationale or the methodology that's used to get that number. I'm gonna give an example with vehicles just because that one's a little more easily quantified. So we need to know, I'll just say it this bluntly, we need to know if the board agrees with swapping out vehicles at 150,000 miles. Is that the right number? Is it 175,000 miles? Is it 200,000 miles? We picked that number because industry standards say after 150,000 miles, that's when you start spending as much on maintenance of the vehicle. You know, you start stressing your own internal maintenance. So we need to know if that's the right thing. With technology, are we gonna do this I'm gonna say this with a smile on my face, one-to-one technology, we can, but you know, that's gonna come with a big price tag and something else has to give. So there's about 7 pages here, I think, of EPP items that I said it with a smile on my face, so Carla, just, you can breathe in, okay, you can breathe out, it's just an example.
I just needed to know what
Yeah,
it was.
she's still breathing. So my observation is that it feels like at one time of the year, we bring the EPP forward, staff does, and at that board meeting, it's like this stuff was just pulled out of the air. And there's a lot of methodology behind this. But we've got to, I guess, just let the board dig deeper into the methodology in order to understand what's on the list and why it's on the list. The strategy before now has been build the budget conservatively, hope there's money left over at the end of the year, and then go buy some stuff. This EPP kind of ended the go buy some stuff. It at least had the list ready. We had the list prioritized and ready at any given time. But what we don't have is this strategy to link it up into the budget. If these are the costs of running this place, then it needs to be built into the budget. That's my point. Don't need to just wait until the end of the year to see if we have enough money. So anyway, so tonight Paige was gonna share with us some information about the budget. Linda was gonna share some information about salary and benefits. Again, high level, knowing that we're coming back in a few months to really drill in. And then we have the Westermans here to talk about INX. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just some kind of big picture questions here. Okay, so just want to make clear, this is the superintendent administration, in a sense, requesting or advising that the board have a greater role to play or oversight in the budget, as opposed to the board demanding a greater oversight or role to play. Does that kind of make sense? I mean, this is you bringing this to the board, or is this one or more board members, in a sense, requesting that the board have more oversight?
I guess it is my observation of the last 24 months as the budget gets tighter and tighter. I think it's going to take a more integrated approach in order to do this in a way where it doesn't break down into finger pointing and, you know, adversarial relationships.
So that was kind of my second part of the question. Just, you know, would this be the way you'd be advising for us to move forward if we were just in usual budgetary times, or is this is kind of seen as because we are in an emergency situation, altering the way things normally operate?
Yes.
That's why we're going to a heightened level of oversight and involvement.
Yes. And that's a good observation.
Because I think generally speaking, you've done a good job over the years, in my opinion. Some may differ. That just getting the board back to doing what the board is legally supposed to be doing, and getting out of doing the things that we all love to do and stick our nose in various aspects of the district's business, but really aren't areas where we should be involved. And so now in some sense we're actually probably going a little bit deeper than maybe we should to some extent. But the cause of that, or the reasoning behind that, is let's just all get on the same page. We do need a little bit more board involvement. It's kind of an emergency type situation, I guess.
I think yes, because for the first time since I've been here in 2010, the numbers don't add up. Unless we happen to grow 1,200, 1,500 kids, all of a sudden we weren't even projecting it, and then all of a sudden life would be great, because we would be living on credit of those kids. And I don't see that happening. Even though we will continue to grow as we projected this year, and it looks like we're 50 kids this year off of our projection, which makes this a little bit less of an emergency meeting. But yet at the same time, and I know, and what Mr. Emma's bringing up, I think is really good. I put board approved in here. If it's board reached consensus at workshop and not formal action, I'm okay with that. But as long as there's a quorum present, and generally speaking, the quorum said, no, we get it. We've looked at the EPP now and we understand what it is. Let's put it in the budget.
Yeah, because the only reason I bring that up is because we're here today and we got a unique situation, hopefully. But I understand the longer term picture too. Do I really want the board from here on out always being involved, and you can't go this way, or the superintendent can't go this way without board approval first? And that may be the board getting a little bit too involved in the budget. Yep. And hamstringing the superintendent a little bit too much if you have to have board approval for various little
I
steps.
appreciate it.
That's why I'm just throwing it out there. That's kind of why we are where we are.
Yeah, and I appreciate the distinction between those. So this really is about the budget. This budget parameter memo that's due next March is gonna be a hard one. I'm just gonna tell you. So these workshops are to just help, let's be very transparent, let's be very transparent with the community the whole way, you know, what's coming now. They may, all of a sudden the state, smiling with this too, you know, may decide this, they're gonna fix even though the Texas Supreme Court said they didn't have to, they're gonna fix school finance, you know, and I'm really smiling about that, you know. Then this isn't as critical, but in anticipation of that not happening, we need to be ready. We do some things that are effective. We get return on investment, I believe, but they're not inexpensive. We do several things that are not inexpensive. We get a 97% graduation rate, you know, with the third non-traditional high school, but that's not inexpensive. So we just need to be transparent about, is everybody comfortable with the ROI we're getting on that? Or is that something that we need to consider, you know, modifying, I guess, to make it less expensive? That's just one example. We'll dig into that.
Budget Committee report, Paige Maloney.
We had the Budget Committee and the Salary and Benefits Committee, and what we decided to do, rather than have all those binders for everybody, but for the cabinet and for the full board, Linda and I collapsed everything into a slide deck, and you probably, did they receive it today? The board members received it today, and it's tabbed by all of the files, and so we're gonna, you know, on the budget side, we're introducing 2 new things tonight, and we'll put those in that file as well. In your packet, the first thing that we're introducing, and I think it was a board request, it was for contracted services, and so it's gonna be your piece of paper that looks like this. I believe that the original request was on consulting services, and so when we started to drill down to the 3 objects for consulting, that's a very difficult report to run because you have to run it by vendor, but fortunately it was at the end of the year, and that can aggregate some things. But the first slide was our 2017-18, and this was for the last school year, was our proposed budget by major object General Operating Fund 199. And the arrow and the contracted services were right at 10.1 million, but through budget amendments, most of it in the EPP, those contracted services it was increased to $11.7 million. If you go to the second page, basically what I've done is I've detailed every single sub-object code in the 6200s, and I've highlighted the 3 that any consulting work would fall within those categories. And what I did is, as of August 30th, now mind you, we're still paying bills through October, I totaled out expenditures, including encumbrances, and that's what you're gonna see on the right-hand side. And so that's where we ended up. I mean, it's gonna be a little less than that when it's final said and done, because much of that is still in encumbrances, but that's where we ended up for the 6200s. You know, I think sometimes when people look how much we pay the appraisal district, that seems to be quite a bit. Our utilities are in there, but the 3 that are highlighted in yellow would be any consulting that we do would fall into one of those categories. And so the consulting objects, what we have expended or encumbered, what was on August the 30th, that was where we were. Now, if you'll turn to the next page, and I think that there was the request said that we wanted to look at specific vendors. I did not run $0 to $999 because that would have been on the back. If you can look, the back page, that's 549 vendors, less than $1,000. It totals $134,000. 75% were officials, like at $60 or $120, and I'm happy to provide that. It's a very long report, but we just kind of stopped it at $1,000 or over.
And those are part of our check registry anyway.
Right, and it's okay to do that. And so as you can see, those are the ones in the consulting 6219, 6291, and 6299. And so it is only expenditures, because it's only what the vendors have been paid. This report was run on August 20th, because it takes some time to put that together. So that would have changed even between then and now. But it gives you an idea of what we're spending on said vendors and those 3 object codes. I believe when we first took a stab at this, we just had line items and we didn't have it by vendor. This vendor report was even helpful to us, as we didn't, and I'm always looking for the positive in all of, for running these things. We were able to look at, oh wow, this makes more sense to our principals, this makes more sense to our department heads for looking at the particular vendors. So it's something that we will do on an ongoing basis.
So basically, out of that 11.6 or 11.7 million, really only over 1,000 or more is only, well, it comes out, all of it comes out to 2.1 basically. So when people think the consulting is really 8.5% of the budget, there's a whole bunch of other stuff put in there with it, which
Right.
you can see on the second page.
And so consulting also, I mean, some people might not think, security at ball games, I mean, that is gonna be in consulting. Officiating at ball games is also gonna be in consulting, so it's
Our water bill.
our water bill. Well, our water bill is in the 6,200s, but in the consulting, would be that detail report, so.
I have a couple questions. If this was run on the 20th, when was it adding what was left over from last school year, or? It wasn't 20th the first day of school?
Well, it would be the vendor report from September 1 of last year to August
this year.
20th. Yeah, it's hard to put in this format, you have to,
Sure, okay, so September. so-
September 1, 2017 to August 20th,
Got it.
2018.
So, a couple questions I have. One is US Safety Services was for ambulance services.
Which number is that?
It is sort of 14.
Uh-huh.
Where is Shirts EMS on here?
It'd be down in City of Shirts.
One of the larger ones.
Number 108.
108.
Says, that's an SRO. What about for the EMS services?
That's not the full amount of the SRO, it's just a type, she should have added all of the services.
Okay, so that
in
includes
City of
EMS,
Shirts.
everything?
Yes.
We'll modify that, whatever that descriptor box, to just say SRO. I mean, get as much as you can, there's
Yeah.
some blank space there.
Okay. Next, just so I understand, what is the difference between SPI at number 17 and number 59? What is the difference between those two services?
17 and
59?
that is through that, do you know the answer to that on those vendors for background services? I mean, I don't have all
Yeah,
of
I'm
it
not
committed to
gonna-
memory.
Well, we
and I
can
would think
put
it'd
in
have to
more
do
than
with-
big. 59 is your standard DPS,
Standard.
right?
Are
Is the
there any
other one-
volunteer runs there?
Is
Right,
the other one the
yes.
Raptor?
Volunteers or-
We run volunteer background checks, and we also run employee background checks, and the ones for the employees are much more, in-depth than what we do for volunteers.
That's the DPS one, right?
That's the DPS.
And the volunteer one is the other one?
Yes.
Got it. And then number 94, the bureaus. How much of, do y'all get a report without going into detail on how many people actually use that?
Yes, we do.
And how many use it?
We actually have a higher, rate of use of that program than most people that use the program around us, so.
Right.
We have lots of employees and it's for lots of different services,
Yeah.
including legal services and things like that. We also use it when we have employees that need assistance, that we determine need to have assistance.
Right, okay.
So it is used pretty readily.
And we
We do.
encourage it.
I'm sorry?
We encourage it.
We encourage it, and we do get a report quarterly on that for usage
If,
and the reasons for their usage.
and then number 104 for the city of Cibolo, other than SRO, what does that also entail?
I would have to pull everything in that line item to see what we paid out and what it was for.
Can you do that?
Yeah.
Please, for 104 and 108, if you don't mind, please.
We'll just put those on the board update this week. So when we were talking about large expenditures in December, and they, as Mr. Asbeck said, they kind of all interrelate. This would be in December what we would really dig into under large expenditures. this report. But in the meantime, here it is, and Paige will, as there are questions like that, we'll just continue to provide the responses to the full board so that everybody has all the information, all the same information.
I think Ms. Risner said it good, said it well, that when you see consultation, consulting fees, you see this huge number, like, oh my goodness, what, are we getting that much? But when you break it down, it's professional services, consulting, it's a lot of other things. But I know if I would just look at just that number and say,
look at just that one.
consulting, oh my goodness, why are we paying so much? So I can definitely see where someone would look at it and, without knowing the breakdown, that it definitely changes the dynamics.
Yeah, on that very first pie chart, I think what was good for us is we're going to be clear about that 8% or 8.5% is contracted services. And sometimes we would say, consulting, just, quick and just easy, fast word to say, we decided we need to get better at saying, no, that's contracted services, it's not consulting.
Kind of as consultant vendors, if I saw that and saw that number, I'd go, wow.
Right.
And that's why you're gonna have a lot of encumbrances still pending, because you put a lot out there on a contract and you're paying on it until you use it, that sort of thing, so.
So this comes back along with another, and Paige, did we, on the large expenditures, we were going to wait until the, October?
Well,
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah, and I think that's good. So in October, even though the topic's going to be EPP, Paige will present a document, the first of it, so that we can really look at that. Then that's your food for thought for the December meeting. So we'll hand out a few documents, but then we'll dig a little deeper on one topic at each workshop.
And then the next question I have is just because I don't know the answer. If you just pick one of these people, it doesn't matter which one, and you say that we use them for, I'm just making one up, engineering services, and we paid X amount of money for them. What is our requirement to go out on bids? So are we taking someone that we use, or is there a threshold for bids, or?
We have, according to the Professional Services Act, we don't hire professional services for architects or engineers based on competitive bids. We have to select them according to law by their qualifications, and then we negotiate a price for them at a fair and reasonable price. If we can't agree with them, we go to the next agency. If you're talking about architecture, for example, if you have a large project, typical A&E fees are 6% of the construction contract. For example, the Clemens renovation going on over there is about $50 million. The A&E fee is less than 6%, it's in the 5% range. Whereas in federal contracts, we just have a flat 6% fee for all architect services. So we can negotiate depending on the cost. The smaller the cost of the contract, typically the higher the fee.
Or, I don't know, just for autism services, like this time you need the best person out, I don't know, but do we, when we say we need services for that particular?
Same thing as professional services, there are certain professions that are listed as professional services. Medical professionals are one of those. School, what's the name of school therapy? That's another one. So they supplement our staff in the special education area, doing assessments on our students and providing counseling for them. We may have multiple contractors that we can go to provide those services or nursing services. And it's basically based upon the experience that special education may have with them, or the availability of those contractors too, because they're in demand across the area.
So for the majority of these cases, no matter what they are, there's processes in place to make sure that we're not just paying the highest amount for someone. We either get bids or we have certain processes to some degree.
We have budgets. So if we know this particular contractor charges more than the other, we'll find somebody who can do just as good a job for less cost.
All right. I'm gonna cut all the lights on because that one is flickering. Yeah, I know, it's got a little.
The other new item that is in addition to what was already in the slide deck from the notebooks, it was things that Dr. Gibson spoke about earlier with the statements about the EPP, the areas of EPP non-aligned.
So just on the higher view, you should have the overview, and what's different on this one compared to previous ones is we're showing the deferred line, the rose line, moving to the next year, and then what that adjusted total is with the year that was already planned for in there with the 7 million. And this is with the scenario of this year, if moving forward and the board approves the $1.6 million EPP, that would then defer the remaining 6.1 into the next year, and then totaling up next year to the 14 million. So with that being said, that's the first step here. And then having the team go back to look at this again and going through their prioritization drills, exercises that we've done already, and then scrubbing again, looking at the numbers, and then moving forward on those years going forward. Is it the only one?
That one's good.
The second page goes into a little more deeper dive, and you can see the breakdown by department. So the first page was just by department. You can see technology, maintenance and facilities, transportation, athletics, fine arts. And then on the second page, you can see the swim lanes broken out by department, and then what the departments are planning for over the next 10 years.
Wayne, on that document then, so the 1-1, 1-2, 1-3, 1-4 that's behind the other one correspond to those down the left-hand column.
To the statements, yes, sir.
And those are our overarching parameters that the methodology's kind of designed around.
This is a look into what, yes,
How
what
that number
came about, and what the thought process is, the lifespan of an X, and when you need to buy another X, that type of thing.
Mr. Persky, has there been any thought given to upgrading the, and I don't even know what y'all call it anymore, it's typically used for visiting teams at Linhoff Stadium. Of course, still uses it, and I know it's used for like the
North
girls.
End?
Sorry?
The North End athletic
Yeah, the North
offices?
End dressing room, because with our schools being 6A, the number of student athletes that are there and the coaches that are there, the numbers, I clearly not adequate for what we have these days. Now, the other hand, I know that don't the girls soccer use that, or the soccer teams use that, and the girls track, or the track team? I'm not sure, but I know that some of the girls sports use that facility during the spring, and I'm not sure who else uses it other than during football season. But
I know soccer, boys and girls soccer, track, cross country, tennis, golf, tennis.
and I'm sure it'd be adequate for those sports, but my concern is during football season with the visiting teams, when Clements is at home, and then still using it as well, with just the number of student athletes that use it. I'm talking about players, managers, coaches. I've been in there, and to me, it's just, I think it's something we're gonna need to look at, if not this year, pretty soon anyway.
Is the 2.4 wing, is that, it says athletic facilities, would an item like that be part? I've noticed it says turf, tracks, and gym floors. So would that fall in another category? Because that's not a turf or a track or a gym floor.
Oh, on the maintenance side, on the facility side?
Yeah, so what Mr. Pivito is asking, where would it fit in the framework, I guess is what I'm asking.
More than likely on the facility side, since it'll be a expansion or a new building. So you're looking.
Is it closer down to 4 of those?
athletic facilities
Yeah,
or additions and
athletic,
renovations.
okay, so
Yes,
it
sir.
would be, now I'm seeing that, so it'd be in four, because there's batting cages, stadium revisions, tennis court, wrestling.
Are those offices used in there currently, by anyone?
I believe so. I think they're using every space.
There's offices as well as storage. All those older offices,
Yeah.
they're either coach's offices or storage.
So they could, at some point, be renovated to actually be used for those. I mean, they would probably could stand some renovation in order that they're really functional
Yeah.
as storage.
That building, I think, was originally built for district athletic offices.
Right,
And
yeah.
now we've got to repurpose it with
Right.
the coaches.
Yeah, 'cause I know the athletic director and the secretaries were there at one point. I know there's a bathroom or a dressing room for officials in there as well, and I'm sure that's probably could be upgraded too. I'm just, cause I know it's been a while, how many years that building's been there, but it's been there a while.
Those front offices were not plumbed with sewage, water, sewage, and all those kind of things. They were the offices.
Yeah.
They don't have any of the
Right.
utilities that would support that, so that would have to be.
See, and
But they could be. I mean.
So I think one of the things that we need to do is decide on a threshold of when any facility, not just an athletic facility, is subject to renovation. I mean, and that's the purpose of the EPP, is to try to get at that. I mean,
Right.
it's
Well, and
embedded.
that's why I brought it up. I didn't mean to get into a big discussion about it, but when I saw this, you know, again, with being there Friday night and seeing the numbers that are coming out of there and just,
Well, and I was in a hallway today where stuff is falling off the wall, so that seemed pretty important to me today also, you know, I guess. So it's just this balance of.
no, I understand.
When do you fix all this stuff? What is the schedule for fixing all this stuff? So Wayne, EPP, a deeper dive in October,
Yes, sir.
so that's when we'll go in to this with a little deeper dive.
But how's so some of it was deferred, and so what you're asking for 1.6 this year. Yes, September, so outside of the core stuff, teachers and the students, this is all maintenance, you chose maintenance and buildings and maintenance. How did you come to, what is it, roofing, access?
Roofing, access control, and then finishes, interior and exterior finishes.
Which is what I was talking about.
So access, I get, that's safety concern. Roofing, you can't have a leaking roof, that affects students. That'll lead to moisture and mold buildup, it could be worse. I mean, so just out of those three,
These are just the most glaring needs off the very top of the list.
I think to get at the finishes part is it's been pushed down so far. We've done as much as we can keep doing the patchworks and everything else, but eventually it just keeps adding. Back before my time, there was a plan that was put in place, the district plan on that, and that got pushed. And each time it's gotten pushed, and now it's up to, JD, what was that?
22 years old, both of the campuses we're looking at.
Yeah, 20 to 22-year-old campuses that we haven't done anything on those interior finishes or exterior.
So we've never put those in the budget to be done, the regular.
It's only been handled through the maintenance budget as we can do.
Okay.
But not
It's
generally
never been put in
speaking.
for a cycle like.
We're at a big
No.
overarching, let's fix it all. So it's just kind of patchwork from within the maintenance budget if there's money left over.
If there's money there and if there's resources to go towards that, human capital too, if we can put the
Our
people.
goal would not to be having EPP. Our goal would be to have these worked into the regular budget if that was possible, but that hasn't been possible.
And it's,
I'm gonna say yes to that. I mean, in an ideal world, I'm gonna
Right,
say
because
yes.
those are the things y'all say that we need, and so in an ideal world, we would want these in our budget if we had all the
That's
money
correct.
that we could have.
And part of the challenge right now is that we're trying to bite off some big bites because we're behind, we believe, and then get it to a smaller number that could be built in to the budget more easily, if that makes sense. That's,
Would it be safe to say that these are not unexpected expenses? We know these are coming.
Correct.
Whereas if we ever came back to looking at fund balance, it would be something that's unexpected, not something that we know about. Would that be safe to say?
Yeah, I mean, but however, we're saying we may need to look at fund balance right now until we can get this operational, just again, get that big bite over with so we can get caught up. And then it's built into the budget and we're not having to hit fund balance for them at some point in an ideal world.
This is, we take this and we say, okay, that's fine, 1.6 seems reasonable. But what other big ticket items will you be asking us to approve that may come from the fund balance? This is 1.6, and 1 or 2 months later,
It's right here, it's it's the ones that are deferred.
that's for the 2020.
Well, it's 1920, that's, we're starting.
There's also no instruction stuff in here either. This is just all maintenance, right?
Correct.
So I know there's more needs than just EPP that we could be pulling from the fund balance.
Yeah, we've left a
Correct.
line item, we get some, state money for some things, but we've left a line item in there that with blank, knowing that there could be some instructional things, but to be perfectly honest, we hated to plug a number into that until we did this large expenditure thing where we prioritize what we're already spending. You see what I'm saying? There has to be consensus about what we're already spending before we go say, okay, well, now let's add to the EPP.
Yeah, but I'm saying those could be some needs just as equal to these in some
Yeah.
people's minds.
Yeah, these-
And I
Well, no,
think
they're
this,
being- I wanna
the
make sure
increases
he-
in our budget this year were in the instructional
Okay,
areas,
that's-
instructional support being one of them, which I
Right.
think is excellent.
Yeah.
And that's where it should be going. But, and I said Thursday night that I was probably gonna bring up the TRE again tonight, but I won't.
So
The, Mr. Westbrook, the board over time has done a good job, in my opinion, of keeping instruction in the regular budget to some extent. These other items are the things that were just constantly outside of that we said we can't just wait until the end of the year and see if we have some extra money. Okay, now it's not to say that there aren't some additional needs, there are. We were looking at interventionists this very year as an instructional need that we felt like we had.
Well, we're looking at that, and part of the ongoing work with curriculum in our 4-year plan was identifying, when we look at critical content, focused planning guides and all of those things, what are the resources that we've got to ensure that are on every campus? And that's everything from PE to AP, English 4.
And that's not in there, and that's probably
And
your
that-
point.
and I think it's because of the budget committee, we looked at EPP was additional, as well as there's another list, which you just brought up the interventionists and things like
Yeah.
that. So when we're looking at this, I think, I look at this too and go, well, there's also another list that was in this book too of other things that, so this to me is all, obviously we all want more, but there's more encompassing than just.
Yes, the majority of this is replacing what we already own and or fixing it.
Right.
That's 95% of this. It's not adding, I mean, sometimes it feels that way. 1,000 computers, well, it's 1,000 computers replacing the 1,000 computers that are now 8 years old. 5 trucks, it's 5 trucks replacing the 5 trucks that now have 175,000 miles on it. 10 buses, it's 10 buses, that, you get my point. So this doesn't represent an expansion of goods and services for SCUCISD. This is the cost of doing business in your world, primarily. Okay.
Well, I see the roofing is really important. Like I said, I've said on a couple of occasions that I've seen what happens when roofs aren't maintained, and it creates a whole lot of other issues that like, been brought up. It's mold, mildew. It's just not a good situation. Certainly understand that. very
my
well.
contention is, sorry. Were you finished? I'm sorry. I apologize. Teacher pay, that may come out of the fund balance. We have EPP may come out of the fund balance. Then we're talking about instructional needs, comes out of fund balance. All these things 2 or 3 months apart don't seem that bad, but when at the end of the year, you're like, we spent this from fund balance, this from fund balance, this from fund balance. Next thing you know, we're talking dire situations and exigent circumstances, and we are wondering how we got to this point.
Well, as stated earlier, these numbers do not add up. So there, ergo, back to the conversation with Mr. Inman to do this in a workshop setting. There's some tough choices ahead.
But I don't think you should just pick the EPP in and of itself. It's not by itself, because it has to be related to everything else that's gonna come from the fund balance. So if we just take the EPP and say, man, that's not bad, we'll be all right. You gotta tell everybody that say, somebody's not gonna get a higher pay raise, instructional needs are gonna not be met. Something else has to suffer. I'm done. But something has to give.
I would like a
Something has to give. We
clarification.
can't have everything.
Yeah, so when we changed that from 5 million to 1.65 million, we felt like that was the give. We're taking it down to the least, the stuff that's the most imminent. The 4 million other items on there got pushed. That's why that number is 14 million in the 1920.
Is this where you ask for observations from the budget committee, or what else do you want to do?
If you would like.
You had the budget committee. Are there any observations from, who was on the budget committee? Dave, Amy, Jerry?
I think it's important that we, if we're gonna talk about pay raises and teacher funding, that shouldn't come out of fund balance, because fund balance is a one-time thing. It
I
needs to
think
be-
he's referring to the one-time cash, I think is what you're
The
referring to.
one-time deal, anything that comes from the fund balance, but it can't be siloed in and of itself because it's related to another cost, operational, opportunity cost. Everything has an opportunity cost. If we get this one, we can't have this one.
So, with all due respect, you're preaching to the choir. Okay, so we just brought these forward, waiting for the board to say, let's do this and don't do that, or let's do that and let's don't do this. I don't know how else to do it. We've presented it multiple times.
You know, you've heard my observations. I think it's as dire, and I've seen dire. You know, and I've told Greg this, I've told Robert this. I've been here a long time, and I know a lot of people get tired of hearing about that, but I've seen a lot of budgets, and I don't know that we've had any time where budgets have really been easy, that we've never had everything we've needed. I don't know that anybody does. And you know, anything we take out of fund balance should be a one-time purchase, and if that's a one-time salary increase, then so be it. I mean, not a salary increase, but a, you know, one-time.
Which the way the board has
Payment.
structured this year's consideration is that it's just one time.
Right,
So
yeah.
that box is
Exactly,
put
and
around.
that's what fund balance should be used for.
Right.
You know, we can.
There was a district nearby, that sounds like a fable, there was a district nearby that chose to go ahead and just balance the budget on using fund balance. Now, you know, but they, eyes wide open, they knew they couldn't carry it on beyond next year. You know, something has to change next year. So that was just like, this is the last hurrah, you know, so.
Well, I had a conversation at Region 20 one night with a board member of an adjoining district, and they had given their staff a salary increase. And I said, well, how are you paying for that? He said, well, unfortunately, it's coming out of fund balance.
Right.
I said, what are you gonna do next year? He
Right.
said, I don't know,
Yeah,
that's next
there's-
year.
There's several.
I said,
well,
that's crazy talk,
there's
man.
a few that are choosing to do that.
Are you gonna address this book sooner or later?
But tonight, I think everybody does have a copy now of the yellow book, or no?
Smart budget.
We have, okay, yes, we need to give.
So the thought is just everybody reads it as we're having these conversations over the next 4 months. It's not to do a book study or a PowerPoint or anything. It's just kind of as a backdrop of, so everybody's understands
Well,
it.
that brought up another question for me tonight. It was, do we still have state leave and local leave, is that correct?
Yes.
And for instructional staff, it's 5 of each, is that, or is it 5 and 6, or
Yeah.
6 and 6?
It's 5 each.
5 of each.
State, 5 local.
You use the state first, or which one is personal, and which one is sick, or does it matter? They don't delineate that anymore? Cause I know there at one time, one was personal, one was sick, and then you had to use one of them first, one stayed first, or I don't know, anyway. But do
The
we
local
include the
considered
cost of that?
discretionary, so.
Oh, Okay, but do we include the cost of that in our benefits package when we talk about dollar amounts? Because we have to pay for substitutes in most cases.
Yeah, that's part of the next presentation, I think.
Well, I know, but since we brought up the book.
They, that's something we're going to do a better job of advertising, because the way that with the policy, you'll see it's in there this next month when we look at policy, but, you know, we'll probably pay better than most around with,
Yeah, absolutely.
with retirements and with the separations of staff members that can, if they don't use their leave, what they can do, what the paycheck they have coming, basically,
Yeah.
for getting paid out for that leave upon separation
Right.
retirement, so.
It could add up
that is
quite a bit if you
that's
take care of it.
definitely a benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is I noticed, which if you look at first year salaries in our area, they're very, very close in most cases. It's the fifth year where it delineates. We spend about $5,000 more for a staff member. Well, other districts may be 1,000. I was shocked at
For the
one
teacher
of-
salaries.
Yeah, for the teacher salary. One local district is only $1,000 difference between first year and fifth year. Some are 2,000, some are 3,000. We're the highest in difference between first and fifth year. People need to hear that story too. I don't know.
Yeah, so with respect to the book, what I think I would recommend is everybody start reading it, and then I want to be realistic, because I know it's easy to say, how long's the meeting going to be? Oh, we'll be in there an hour. You know, if we're going to have a robust conversation, I think to say in October we're going to have less than a 2-hour meeting, it's not accurate. So personally, I think we need to just say it's going to be a 2-hour meeting, and we're going to try to get as much out on the table as we can, and go through EPP and what we're reading in the book, you know, for a couple of hours. Take a couple of hours.
And what we can do, we've provided a schedule to the cabinet, for their reading, and we can provide that to the board if they wanna stay at.
Yeah, I think
With the
that would be good, so
administration.
you know the same schedule that everybody, yeah.
Well, I will, instead of me complaining and not offering something as unpalatable as it may seem, at least this book indicated that for a district of 10,000, if one student was added to every class, savings of like 1.3 million could be saved.
Yeah, you already do that.
That's a lot of,
You do it every year when you
Okay.
approve the class size waivers. You've already,
Yep.
you can go check on that chapter you're doing.
Yeah, we're saving a lot of money by doing that.
Yeah, it's more than 1 million every
so
year.
when you feed into it, I would also like to know at the next board budget update is minimum, maximum, and if it's even palatable to
Yeah.
add another student to every class and save some more money. I
So
don't-
this whole staffing guidelines in November, that's what that's all about. I mean, that's just digging deep into what it is and what it could be, and how, when you just change it slightly, what numbers, you know, how it changes the numbers. That would be the November meeting. That kind of the way you see it.
Nobody wants to hear that, but that's one way. I'm just saying, if I'm gonna complain, at least I offer a possibility.
Yep.
That's all I'm saying. So I'm not just complaining and not offering an option to everybody else around here.
So what, just in the interest of time and that, since we know we're gonna dig deeper now on the monthly ones, do we wanna just jump to the salary and then hear from INS, and then just see if there's questions or observations at the end maybe? So Linda, you're gonna give a quick overview of.
Yes, I had 2 additional documents that aren't in the slide deck, but the first one is the substitute amounts, and this did come from a committee member request to include this in our study. This is the amount per campus that is being spent on substitutes this past year. This is for every kind of possibility. So this is people that are taking leave, this is individuals going to a staff development or professional development opportunity. We might have asked for extra help because of student needs, or extra help. Some of the campuses will ask for extra help during STAR tutorial time and try to get the teachers in there to work with at-risk kids. So this will include every reason that we have a substitute. So currently that budget comes, is centralized here in Paige's department, but broken down. This is something I think we would be looking at this next year. And prior to one of our actions is going to be talking about staff attendance, and so this will fit nicely into that as well. So I provided with that information. And then, to Mr. Westbrook's point, at the K-4 level, we are under a, state rule that says that we are supposed to divide by 22 to 1 in the K through 4 classrooms. Pre-K is not, there's no ratio there, and then anybody above 4th grade, there's no ratios. So, at K to 4, by our staffing guidelines, we've tried to, at the kinder and 1st grade level, to be at 22 to 1, and then at 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, we're staffing at 24 to 1. So, the beginning of the year, I'm monitoring all classes across the district, K-12, pre-K-12 actually, but K-4 is important because we have a waiver request coming up, and we have to look to see if there's an additional teacher needed based on those ratios. So, looking at, this was as of this morning, looked at it just recently, each of the campuses, looking at potential teacher needs. We already have 2 campuses that are significantly over either the 22 to 1 or the 24 to 1, and that was 1 teacher at Pasco in 2nd grade. There's some classes of 27 right now sitting over there. At Rose Garden, they were at 22 to 1 in kindergarten, and there were 11 kids over that. So what we've done there is we did have 2 positions left from the fast growth, and we went ahead and gave them the billet numbers to start looking at hiring for those positions because they were just so significantly over. In the meantime, while they're trying to get them hired, we have actually given them substitutes to help just manage students.
I'm gonna back up from the 17-18 fast growth.
Yes, for the 17-18
Not
fast growth.
18-19, because we did not put any in 18.
No, we did not.
Okay.
So, you'll see the other campuses, we're pretty close to those ratios. We might be over by a student or 2. So we have some, for instance, at Cibolo Valley, they have 1 teacher with 25 kids. We've tried to get them to 24 to 1, but there is a classroom with 25. We have not done anything to help those teacher needs at that point in time, or at this point in time. I'm also monitoring class counts because there's some that are getting close to those ratios. So we have, some schools here, you go back to Cibolo Valley, they have, they get 1 more student there, but it's gonna be at 22 to 1. So, 4th grade at Green Valley, you've got 1 more, and they're gonna all be at 24 to 1. So, we're gonna monitor those. And then when we look at the number of waivers, the state did change it a couple years ago where we don't need to offer or ask for a waiver based on the ratio at the grade level. We now have to do it per classroom. So you'll see, just give Cibolo Valley as an example, in kinder, we have to ask for 1 waiver. And I put in there not due to ratio because they actually put 1 student at 1 classroom at 23 and there's another one at 21. You could move that child, but for some reason it could be the needs of the child, it could be the teacher in that classroom that they've placed that one at 23. But we still have to ask for a waiver because we have a classroom at 23.
And I'd say when we aggregate for the savings, we would only, like if there's 4 waivers on a grade level, it would only count as 1 teacher.
So at Cibolo Valley, for instance, we didn't have the waivers being requested and we didn't place kids at 24 to 1. We'd actually have to hire 2 additional teachers at Cibolo Valley, a 3rd grade and a 4th grade teacher, to get off that waiver. So you'll see those waivers require, per grade level, 1 additional teacher if we're asking for it. And then we're also, and I'm helped with Ms. Goldhorn's help, we actually monitor the pre-K numbers as well. We look at, can we combine the morning and some afternoon pre-Ks together? If there's 2 teachers on a campus, can we combine and use that teacher for assistance in other areas? A lot of these classrooms also have paras. Can we use the paras in other ways to help assist the campus? But we also have to look there because some of these are 3 or 4 year olds that have also some needs that come with it. So we have to make sure that we have the manpower there to help work with the kids as well. So that's a little bit harder area to really monitor. Sometimes it looks like it's low, but it's also the types of needs of the students in that classroom that we have to look at for those 3 and 4 year olds. So, any questions on that?
So
About
if you use paraprofessionals in the classroom, I mean, the concern is you end up hiring too many paraprofessionals. It defeats your savings. So you could have hired 1 teacher and put more students in that classroom where you can't do that with paraprofessional. You're kind of stuck in that one.
That book really talked about that. That book really talked about, people say, well, just hire more paraprofessionals, raise it up, but in the end, then you're providing insurance and all the benefits, and it kind of cost of eye-opening to me.
After a while, it does,
too.
you're right.
Is the staffing ratio the same for the AP classes and the honors classes and all those?
No, well, we look at, the way we staff high school is we take the, course counts and we staff it by, for ELA, it's 28-1, and for, all other subjects, it's 30-1. So what you do is you look at their master schedule, and there could be, in an AP course, 35 kids, but in a, like, say it's an English 1 class, you might get those ratios lower because they might really wanna work with the kids. So they can take their staff and really build their master schedule to meet the needs of that campus. So you may staff up to higher numbers, or student numbers may be higher in certain classrooms than other classrooms, based on the needs of the kids in those classrooms.
So
If that makes sense.
So if you have, just, so you have 6 classrooms in a grade level. 2 of those classrooms are dual language. What, are the numbers similar to the other classrooms, or is it just a much lower number?
And the
Or
dual,
how does that look?
well, I take dual language separate.
Yeah.
So in dual language, the way that it's staffed is you have to have an English component and
Right.
you have to have the Spanish component.
Right.
So at every grade level, you have to have 2 teachers.
Right. No.
And the numbers are typically lower because of that.
Yeah, oh, well.
Then I take the rest of that grade level minus those dual language numbers and then divide it by the ratio. So say it's 5th grade, the ratio is 25-1. So then I take the rest, put dual language out, then take that grade level, 5th grade at Wilder.
Right.
Here's the number, divide it by 25, and it tells you how many teachers you need. And then that's how it's staffed.
Gotcha.
It's based on
And
those
the
teachers.
cost of the differential will be part of that large expenditure report in December. We'll actually see it next month, but then there'll be a discussion, because the cost of the differential is what we do above and beyond the requirement by law.
And over time, we have added up those ratios. So going into 28 and 30 at the high school level, or actually junior high and high school level, was not something we always did. So would they like it to be lower? They would love to go to about 25-1.
Yeah. Good.
But we've had to move them up just to be able to save on teachers.
Because I know at Schertz Elementary, and that was, at that time, the only school with dual languages, the dual language classrooms were considerably smaller than the other classes. Of course, at that time, you only had to have a grade level ratio. You didn't have to do by class and all that sort of thing, so.
I
or
just pulled out the
waiver.
dual language now because those
Yeah.
are gonna be staffed completely separate than the regular.
So we have it at Cibolo Valley now,
Yes.
and then the intermediate school is Wilder, is that correct?
Yes.
And it will be discussed as a separate item under the large expenditure report.
How many periods does every teacher teach? We're talking 6?
Well, you can't really say because some of them have coaching periods, some of them have department lead periods. So it really depends on the actual
Duty
person.
period.
It could be, if we have a traveling, they can get a traveling period. We've tried to kind of do away with that, but there may be a traveling period included in that.
Only reason I say is this book also brought up the possibility, I know it's another district, I know it's from Massachusetts, but I know it'd be problematic, but long story short, is if certain teachers were willing to teach another period for an X amount of money, then it would save on paraprofessionals, it would save on substitutes, because they're teaching an extra period a day.
I know at the high school, typically the grade level chairperson or department chairs, whatever you want to call it, have 2 off periods. They have their off period, their scheduling period, and they have their period because they're the chairperson.
Yes, that's correct.
And we don't pay that out of instruction, we pay it out of staff development.
Right.
Because they're
Yeah.
organizing people.
But it's still a period of time.
Adults.
Period.
Adults.
It's still a period that they're not in the classroom
Classrooms.
with
Yes.
instruction.
What
That's
I want to say about that as
that's-
well is, yes, there are a select few that have that, coaching periods we mentioned, they have responsibility.
They're instructional,
That
right?
is their
No, I-
class period.
Right,
and
that's a
one of
class
them.
period.
And same way with other
Yeah.
fine arts electives and things like that. They have kids in those periods that are assigned to them on roll. So it's
I'm
not
talking,
administrative without
your
kids.
grade level, like your department chair for math.
Your English department chair.
Science, English, social studies, they will typically have 2 periods, that they're not scheduled in the classroom.
So, in order to help this conversation in November, or whenever we decide to take it up, then we'll have the staffing guidelines just laid out. So then they'll be in front of everybody, and then we'll dive deep. And the thing about those guidelines is it's not an exact science, so, you may anecdotally be able to think of something that's outside of that, but they're guidelines. It is a target that we try to hit as we start the year. This is a messy business, so student needs, sometimes don't equal perfect class structure, but we try to start the year at a certain place. So we will dig deeper into that in November, whenever we take up salary and benefits. Actually, it's gonna be staffing, salary and benefits now. We realize that staffing needed to be a part of that conversation. And not that the other stuff is not important, but when we finish that conversation, that's around 87% of the budget. So that conversation is 87% of the total in the no budget.
Yeah, but everything y'all just said was, I won't say counter, this was sort of reducing staff, and all I've heard tonight was increasing staff. And so,
We're just reporting on where we are,
This
sir.
is actually reducing staff.
that's reducing staff.
Yeah, because for every ratio that doesn't say not due to ratio, every waiver here for a grade level is 1 teacher. So if you total those up, we would be looking at, 2 more teachers for Cibolo Valley. Green Valley would need 2 more teachers. Houseville would need none. Rose Garden would need an additional teacher. So beyond what we're monitoring over here. So that is trying to reduce, that has reduced staff actually over the years that we've
And
put in the class size waiver.
if there are further reductions, then what I guess I'm saying is everybody needs to have their eyes wide open before next January and February, so that it's rolled out.
So there already have been some austerity measures.
So,
Yeah,
other
there's
things we can
plenty
do.
more that
Yeah.
could be, you'll get a chance to see all the options.
What do we have next?
So no more conversation about salary and benefits? I mean, that's pretty much what we're gonna talk about.
No, we're gonna go a whole 2-hour meeting in November, is what we're saying. I
If
mean,
you had
we can
something to
do
say.
more.
If
No,
you had
that's
something to
fine.
say, let him say it.
No, I was thinking, hold on. I mean, just comment I had, and kind of what Robert said earlier. I mean, at the end of the day, we only have so much money.
Correct.
And it's nice to say we need more, but then you have to take it from somebody else, aka the taxpayers, and they're gonna get a pay cut. So it's one of those things where we can't be number one in everything. And the concern I still have, and I know it's not popular to say, but once upon a time I was here, and I think Taylor may have been a principal at the time. I mean, we were one of the lowest paying districts in this area, almost embarrassingly so. I mean, would have never dreamed of a day when we would be paying at or more than Judson, Northeast, Northside, or what have you. Whether officially or unofficially, we set a goal to attract the best teachers we could find and pay accordingly. And lo and behold, now we're not only one of the top paying, we're, as David put it, at the 5 or 10 year mark, we're paying $5,000 more per year than our competitors are paying, which is 8 to 10% more than the number 2 team or district is paying. And I hate to even run the numbers, but if we're paying 86% of our budget on salaries and benefits, if we were to hypothetically scale that back down to where we're still in the top 25%, I mean, how many extra millions of dollars would that allow us to then put it into these other things that we say are important as well?
That's correct.
And
No disagreement from the staff.
does that make sense? Just
Yeah, no
conceptually
disagreement.
speaking, it's hard to, I mean, no offense, Dave, but when you say we're in dire straits, I still get back to 86% of our budget is being paid out for salaries to folks that are making not only the top in the city, but the top in the city plus 8 to 10%.
But I would say that 85% of our budget has always been salaries, regardless of what the amount was, because the budgets have moved accordingly. And I understand what you're saying. We'd have to move the budget back, and then we'd have a full-scale rising. I fear, from
I guess legally we never, I mean, I'm not proposing we cut salaries, I mean, we can't, even if we want to, I'm just
One-
saying.
One way to look at, I think what Mr. Pivot is saying is if you look at what is gained from that class size waiver, it's about what you're spending additionally on the salary schedule. So you're working with a leaner staff, but you're compensating them more than the neighbor. I mean, that's one way to look at it.
And we have to be clear that that's our teachers. There's still some information that's in that PowerPoint, I believe, that for other staff members, we're not in the top decile by any means with some of our operations
Sure.
staff and maybe even some of the instructional para staff and all that. So teachers definitely, but not for the staff across the board.
But I appreciate you bringing it up, and part of the salary compensation, that third item at the beginning, is in addition to the board adoption of the compensation plan, that we adopt a compensation strategy that the board, so that we know, is it top decile, is it top quartile, what are we trying to target?
Well, that's why I said, if X amount of years ago, we'd have said we want to be in the top 10%, and you reach that goal, then you start funneling those extra dollars into something else as opposed to trying to be in the top 1% or the top 1%
Correct.
plus 8%.
That's correct.
I mean,
Yep.
that way, because again, I've known plenty of teachers and they're always gonna think they should get paid more, and that's fine. It's probably worth it, but it's just, we live in a competitive world where we just can't keep paying you more. I mean, it's just, we're not a private sector, we can go out and raise more money or work harder or be more efficient. I mean, we only have a certain amount of dollars at play from the taxpayer, and if we want to be the highest paying district in the area, which I think is fantastic, I mean, that's great. We get the best teachers and staff that we can find. Something's got to give somewhere else. I mean, we can't be in the top 1% in all these different categories. So that's, I'm not, certainly not advocating to cut teacher pay because we can't even want to, but it's one of those things where I agree, Dr. Gibson, if we had instead of just pay more, because the answer will always be more. I mean, how much do you want to get paid? More. I mean, that's always going to be the answer, right? And that's really not a strategy. I mean, that's just something that we're just chasing our tail every year, and then we still get the low ratings on employees aren't happy with their compensation. If we did have more of a systematic, we're going to be happy if we're in the top 10%. Can everybody agree on that? Which ought to be favorable. I mean, we ought to pat ourselves on the back if we got the top 10. Then you start funneling those dollars into something else.
And and I would just say that if and when the board embraces that and we reach that, you can't just fix that overnight. I know I'm not saying you're saying that, so you have to take a number of years, but all the more reason that it has to be a strategy, because it takes 2 or 3 or 4 years to get it accomplished, if that makes sense. You can't just throw the brakes on and just start reducing. You just have to give less of an increase, if that makes sense.
Yeah, which I know isn't going to make anybody popular.
What some districts or some organizations do in order to address it is they build one amount into the pay scale and then another amount as a one-time payment. It's not in the pay scale, if that makes sense. So at the end of the day, it's close to what you would have gotten, but it's not built into the scale. And then you have to do that for several years in a row in order to get there. But that will be part of that analysis, and we really would like to come out with a strategy, and not just with teachers, I think is what you were alluding to earlier, but all pay categories. So you'll need to kind of show us where we are with respect to all pay categories, so we can have a strategy for all categories.
Teachers always get the press, but half of our staff are non-teachers, and
Right.
every bit as important.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's because like this year is a perfect example where our competitors are not paying any pay raise or one-time payments than we do. We're just making the gap even further. I mean, at some point, somebody's got to pay the price because we don't have unlimited amount of funds. And if everybody else is freezing salaries and we're still moving ahead, we're just getting further away.
So this year, there is no pay raise. I just want to make sure that's real clear. There is no pay raise in this budget. So if anybody out there gives a pay raise, then the market has moved, further out. Now, the board did authorize the possibility of a one-time, that's what you were talking about earlier, one-time payment out of fund balance. Or, I don't guess it necessarily has to be out of fund balance, it depends on how many kids get here. So, but anyway, all this will be the November. Let me ask this, would it be better to go ahead and dig into staffing in October and EPP in November, since 87% of the budget is staffing? Take that one on first and EPP second?
That's a big elephant.
Okay, so go ahead, that way you give yourself more time to dig a little deeper if you need to. That was just a thought.
Well, people come first, it's people.
Yeah, so if it's 87% or 86%
Yeah,
of
the
budget.
earlier you get it out, the better.
So Linda, that, your timeline just got moved to 30 days instead of 60.
We also have a TASB salary review this year, is that correct? So that's out there.
Thank you, because it would be better if we had that conversation ahead of time, because see, we're going to advise them on how to evaluate it. What's our philosophy, or what's our strategy? So, and they're gonna evaluate it against that strategy.
Yeah, I've been quiet for the first part of this. And going on what both David and Gary had to say, it seems like we've been going off merry way, raising salaries, which is not a bad thing when we're trying to attract the best teachers, the best staff. But I think they kind of got away from us at some point. We started running our money on a limited basis that way, which is not a bad thing, but we took money away from other things, and we kind of lost the mark on that. Kind of like what Wayne's saying, we deferred over there, we moved the money over to another spot, which was not a bad thing, but now we're paying the piper.
Yeah, so in the absence of a strategy, I can just tell you anecdotally what was stated every year. We need to do this to help with the increase of healthcare costs. That's what was said. So in the absence of it, we need to hit these targets. We just did it to help offset healthcare costs. And it kind of did. I mean, the healthcare costs, unfortunately, were growing so large that in some cases people were still not getting a raise.
We never had individual strategies for each line item or each function. And in the process, we never had a comprehensive budget.
Right.
Not really, we had a budget, but it wasn't a comprehensive budget. Look at everything and say, okay, it's just where the money needs to go, it's just where the money needs to go, what are we getting for it? We've gone off this way because we always had money, now all of a sudden we don't have it, and we're having to make those hard decisions. So that's what I'm seeing here, is that we're finally getting down to the point of making a comprehensive, true dollar budget.
Well,
Which we've never really done. We've never had any strategies across the board. We've had budgets, but we haven't had overall comprehensive.
Yeah, hopefully, we will have a better ability to control healthcare costs now, so that when we build this strategy, if we can hold the cost down, then it can be a real raise and not just eaten up through healthcare. I mean, it's at least the best shot we have.
But again, that's one facet of a much larger puzzle.
Yeah, I know most staff members just want to feel a raise beyond their healthcare costs. I mean, that's generally speaking, that's just anecdotal, but that.
Right, now you're right, for the last 6 years, whatever raise we have given has been eaten by increase in healthcare costs. And it's not just us, it's everyone.
Right. Okay, so I sense that maybe we'll take this up next and then EPP after that. I think that's a good, Wayne, I know you're chomping at the bits to have a 2-hour show here, just you, the Prusky show, but we'll defer it.
But just for thought before we move on, I think in the initial salary and benefits committee, we did sort of say the minimum was the top quartile. We didn't want to drop below that one.
Yeah,
And so,
we pretty much agreed to that.
yeah, we agreed to that one.
Okay, so if we can come back and revisit that and then formalize that with the full board and either have the board adopt it as a strategy or just embed it in the budget parameter memo, that's all we need.
Dr. Gibson,
Yes.
on that, you addressed it, I know, Ms. Cannon has been also working very hard on this. Anecdotally, I just speak because of the wonderful information that Ms. Cannon provided to committee members. Looked at it, the 2 lowest scoring from the staff engagement survey was in salary and benefits. I mean, we didn't even get close to the 70%. It's very low. So I was trying to reconcile why were we scoring so low in those 2 items, and yet, we're constantly being told we're one of the highest paying school districts. So I called up, so the anecdote was, it looks like it on paper that we're getting paid more, but, and then they were citing the different districts that were contributing more toward the health insurance premiums, and that's where this district has fallen behind a bigger chunk. And I was actually being told I'm making less money this year, this past year I made less money than I made the year before. The other issue that came up was once this district moved away from the step system of establishing surveys and went to the midpoint system, they said that has made it more difficult because it's more ambiguous being at the midpoint, using the midpoint system to determine salary increases. And so it's more difficult for employees to gauge how much they would be earning the coming year. The other thing that was noted was that we are increasing, or the perception is, we're increasing the gap between salaries of administration to staff of teachers. We're widening the gap. And that's another issue that we have to look, because if you're a central office admin, this is the place to come. If you're a central office
Yeah, so
administrator, because you've got central office
Yeah,
administrators
the
that are making more
categories,
than some
the-
superintendents are, just
So
as in a
who-
director's
So
position.
based on that, who is saying that? Who is telling you that? Just
Teachers.
Well, so as far as methodology, we probably should let the rest of the committee members see if they have anything they want to say. When we, I think a while ago when we said all pay categories, in everybody's mind, it sounds like everybody was thinking of like auxiliary employees. That includes administrators. So you don't, just like you don't compare a teacher's salary to a plumber's salary, you don't compare an administrator's salary to a teacher's salary. If you want to be competitive, you compare administrator to administrator, teacher to teacher, plumber to plumber. Is that fair to say? So when you start comparing those against each other, TASB would just say, what's your strategy and where do you want to be in the market? Because they're going to go
And they'll
study
look at the
and they're going to go
comparisons
compare
of all those
every,
pay grades.
right, every group to the market.
And that's where the budget, the salary survey will tell us where we're at.
Correct. But we need,
And just from there.
right, we need to know what quartile, and it maybe it's a top half for administrators and it's top decile for plumbers. I don't know.
Let me say this, we've had board members in the past, to be nameless, that didn't necessarily think administrators were people, and kind of played the teachers versus administration kind of game of, and administrators are people too, and you guys deserve competitive salaries too, like anybody else, and we want the best administrators in this area too. Obviously, that makes our districts. I'd hate to get into a game where we're pitting teachers versus administrators and compensations.
And
I don't feel that way. I doubt anybody else does either.
And I agree. I just think, I've been both. I've been a teacher and an administrator. And you look, and I'll be the first one to tell you that teachers work a long, hard day. But I will also tell you that administrators work a long, hard day.
Sure.
And sometimes that includes evening, weekends, summers, and they're being vulnerable to more lawsuits generally, and more grief overall, and I hate to, I'm like Gary, I just hate to have the conversation of, well, what's the difference? Well, I know the differences. I've been in both shoes.
We could
look at a lot of areas in our district where somebody's getting paid a little bit more.
Unless the board
But
tells us.
you also have the difference too, you are compensated because you're paying per day.
Absolutely.
As an
That's the
administrator,
difference.
26.
That's the difference.
So let me, and so
That's
that
the
we don't
difference.
just start back
During
and
the
forth,
summer
so unless the board directs the school administration otherwise, we will follow the TASB methodology, which is to
Yep.
compare job to job.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's the salary schedule of an elementary principal in this district to all over the region, I think they'll do, and then they'll do it to all over the state. And then they'll do the major, and we'll do every single job. And unless we're told otherwise, that is the methodology that's recommended by TASB, is that correct?
And they give you the percentage of the market that you are.
What we've not had in the past is any differential of, do we want to be top decile in one group and top quartile? Is it top quartile to all groups, or is
So that's
it
what
top
we need to
decile?
decide.
But that's what we need to have that conversation. I'm just saying, we just need to decide what that is.
And obviously, I think you guys are probably doing it too, but just like we're doing teacher-student ratios, you also need those kind of ratios when it comes to administration, how many administrators per
She'll have
staff.
that in the
I'm sure you guys do that, but just.
Well, and I think that's probably something that's emerging right now, and we're trying to get better and tighter at that, and that'll be part of that staffing guidelines. and it won't be for every position, but it will be for many. So if, what we may, I don't know if we wanna see if any other committee members, I don't think Ms. Sever is here, so let's see if any other committee members wanna say anything, and then we need to turn it over to the Western.
I'm good.
I think Dr. Patrisky said a fair share. I mean, unless you have anything more, you're on the committee. You good? Okay, thank you. Finley was on my committee. I'm done.
I've said my piece.
I mean, we're gonna go over those observations, so. Kind of nuts.
Sure.
All right, we're gonna shift to INS. This, we save the most stimulating part of the meeting for the last presentation, so hang on to your seats. Yeah.
You said it was all 4 teacher pay raises, by the way.
He's gonna write us a check.
Yeah, there we go, there.
It'll be fun.
Well, I'll start, we are shifting gears to the INS side, and I think you have seen this document where we have an executive summary of where we are with the INS side, and on the second page of this document is a history. You know, it's kind of a picture of a fast growth school district, ours, and the special circumstances that have happened in those years, what our actual revenue was on the INS side, what we received from the state, and you can see that the percentage of that went down, has gone down over time. Part of that in the past couple of years has been, because of we didn't reach our projections with the students, and so that will have an effect on that. And then, what our actual payment was, and so in blue, it shows that we've had to use some of the proceeds of these special circumstances to in fact help us with our payment. So then we have some recommendations for future action in the executive summary, and I'll let Mr. Westerman take it from here on what we plan to do this school year.
Thank you, Paige. It's a little less complicated because there's not quite as many moving parts, but there still are a number of moving parts. I think Paige has done a nice job of succinctly categorizing what's happened over the last couple of years and what we're looking at going forward. I think recapping real quick some of the things that she mentioned, you've had an unfortunate confluence of events with, while your assessed valuation has been growing, and maybe hasn't been growing as fast as we want, and same goes on the student enrollment side. You've been continuing to grow and needing those facilities for new students, but it hasn't been growing at the pace that was originally anticipated. All of those factors combine, and the state funding formulas that have decreased the revenue from the state, and it has hurt how the INS debt service fund has been working, but we've managed to get through. We knew going into the bond programs over the last couple of years that it was going to be a challenge. It wasn't going to be easy, and we planned for some of those uses of fund balance, and we did things with the bond issues and with refunding issues to where we can capture some savings to help get through particular years under the tax rate and the tax revenues that we were expecting. So with those couple of things in mind, I'll go down to the bottom section where the recommended considerations for future action. We will always be looking, we've been trying to maintain INS fund balance so that we have that as a reserve in case we need to dip into that if some of these student growth things don't happen. That's gonna continue to be an option that we'll look at. We do have, and we're gonna look at a little more in depth in a minute, the opportunity to refund about $20 million in bonds that are callable on February 1 of this coming year in 2019. And of course, we'll continue to monitor the student growth, the taxable values, and the facility master plans, and how we can pull all these things together and make them work going forward to the best that we can under these circumstances. Again, it's not nothing easy about making it happen. It's full of challenges. You can use, we talked about the M&O fund balance and INS fund balance. You can use M&O fund balance, M&O dollars if you have to, for INS purposes. Once it goes to INS, you can't get it back. And INS dollars, as they come into the INS fund, cannot go to the M&O side. So it's a one-way street. We don't want, that's kind of the very last option, last fallback option if we ever get to that point. again, the restructuring of the debt or refinancing, we're gonna look at that, and then possible, increase on the INS tax rate side. So if we go to the third page in what she handed out, we meet and talk regularly about what's coming up with assessed values. With April, when the first preliminary values come out, through July, when the certified values come in. We talk with Joe Wisnowski on his ideas on what's gonna happen with the funding formulas for IFA and EDA options. And so we knew that this coming year was going to be one of the toughest years that we face going forward. With this refunding that is 2011 series, I think, on that the district has outstanding, there's $20 million and it produces savings. It's 2010 issue, sorry. It produces savings, and we can use those savings, and we can structure those savings in a couple of different manners to apply to a strategy to try to help going forward on the INS side of your budget. So we looked at a variety of different options here. There's 5 different ones outlined. Option 1 was, let's look at it to address just this current 18-19 year. Can we get some help, and then just let the chips fall where they may going forward? So in that particular scenario, we could get $2 million in savings in the first year. Overall, the district could save over $1.6 million in debt service savings. If we look at it a net present value benefit, it's $1,660,000. That's because we're getting all the savings. We're really taking them all, packaging them up in the first year. But the years after that, it would be just essentially almost a break even or a slight increase of about $60,000 a year. Option 2, same idea, except can we get a little more and get closer to covering all of the expected deficit in the INS side, so we get up to $2.4 million in savings. That ups the cost later on. Our total savings go down, drop under just under $1,600,000 in total. Option 2A, we looked at trying to address, okay, we covered 1 year, how can we shift this around and try to address 2 years and still come out okay? And so we did that. We kept the $2.4 million in 18-19 year, and then we plugged in a little savings, or structured a little savings in the 2020 school year of $344,000. Again, our total savings drops just a little bit, again, about $30,000 over the life of the issue to $1,560,000. But then in the years after that, it goes up a little more. It goes up about $250,000 for several years. Option 2B, okay, with the growth that we're expecting and with the student enrollment growth that we're expecting, how can we look at the next 2 years and see if we can cover it all so that we don't deplete that INS fund balance that we've got on hand, so that we can potentially have that as you look into the next capital improvement program and the next bond election that you're gonna have to go forward. So we have a reserve, again, if you will, to help ease that into the new bond issue. And so in this category, $2.4 million, again, we've kept that first year pretty static, and then in 2020 we structured in $1.1 million in savings. The overall savings now over the life of the issue is $1.5 million, which our biggest number was $1,633,000. Now this is $1.5 million. Our present value savings kind of stays the same across the board. That's because we're really targeting all these savings in the first couple of years. But it does then push the debt service in some of the later years up a little higher. But again, I reiterate, the overall impact of that is a savings of $1.5 million over the life of the issue. And then 2C is just a little slight difference, having a small savings in the third year and then going up. So 2B and 2C are pretty similar. We think this was, and we've done similar things in the past when you've gotten to these situations where the growth in the state funding hasn't fit where we needed to go with the INS fund balance. This would be a way that we can address the issue for 1 to 2 years and then be able to maintain your fund balance and keep it intact as you go forward, in the future for potential future capital improvement programs. Then there was another page that she handed out that was a graph. And this is a graphical illustration. We've had another thing we've showed the administration. We met with them. We call our debt analysis table, where we list all of your bond issues and we look at when they're callable, when you would have access to them, the flexibility to potentially refund and use that for savings is really the ultimate goal in all of those cases. So in 2019, the issue we're talking about, there's $20.8 million that's callable in this upcoming fiscal year. That's the issue we looked at. In 2020 and 2021, we have a little gap where we don't have any issues coming callable in those years. We don't have as much flexibility in those particular times. Another reason, when we looked at the refunding, we put those savings in 19 and 20 just to get us kind of through this gap. Then starting in 22 and 23, 24, that's when we had the larger bond issues to do some of the big facilities plans here at the district. All of those are gonna start coming callable. So we've got 44, almost 45 million, then 84 million and 110 million. There will be a lot of opportunity for those issues, assuming rates are cooperating with us at some savings, or in another scenario, if we just needed it to look at restructuring to help keep within either the 45-cent target or the 50-cent target max, which we really can go to with the two issues. So
is that assumption that they're going to keep doing what they're doing in the feds and just do this judicious incrementalism over the however long until they feel like it's where they need it to be? We're assuming that wherever they finish that journey, that there are some in each one of these that should be over wherever that ends. Is that right?
There should. Part of the reason is because you're getting, when they were sold, those maturities were in the 10 out to 30 years out in length.
Right.
But now we're 10 years down the road, so instead of being a 10-year maturity and an interest rate on a 10 or a 20-year, now they're 1 to 10 years. And so you're shorter on the yield interest rate curve, so you have two things working for you there. Now you're shorter on that amortization or shorter on that time horizon, and hopefully, what we're seeing, the short-term rates have continued to rise, but our long-term rates have stayed down. Now, we all still expect that those long-term rates are going to creep up as well, but I think we'll still see opportunities for savings in those issues. And in the worst case, we list, I think that last category on the front page of the memo that Paige had, those are the tools in the tool chest we talked about. What tools do we have? Well, the other one is restructure. If we had to, before we go to using M&O money, we might want to consider restructuring. That may not produce overall cost savings. That's not our first choice, but if we have to make ends meet at somewhere, we have that opportunity to go there. So this really takes in what she's listed, are all the things that we're gonna look at. Some of them we don't wanna do, are not ever gonna be our first choices, and hopefully we never get there. We'll have these other methods, like this year with this savings from the 2010 issue, and being able to apply those into this little window is, fits just right with what maybe is needed right now.
Yeah, so we have our current needs, and then we have a big thing looming out there on our 10-year plan called high school number 3. So, one thing that I appreciate this chart a lot, because we've said these words, but I haven't really seen it graphically.
Right.
It's almost like if you can make it to 22, then you've got some real money to potentially refund every single year to help us offset that.
That's correct.
What we think will be, new debt related to a new high school. At least you have that tool in the toolbox, and that's
It's
not
there.
a small tool. That's
No.
$200-something million in those 3 years that are eligible for refunding, right?
That's correct.
That's not necessarily savings.
Well, we would think, our assumption is that it would be, right?
Yes, our assumption, for looking at it is, that there's going to be some savings there. But I just, laying everything on the table, if for some reason there's no savings there and we're in a situation they can be looked at to restructure without the savings.
This is just a callable amount. We're not gonna save $44 million.
Oh, no, no.
It's just a callable amount.
I'm just saying, there's two, like, in 2020, there's 0 eligible. Okay, so, yeah, it's nice to know that there's 200-something million that are callable.
To work with,
To
and
work
not
with,
that much savings, yeah, no. not
So
that much
on,
savings.
so just to do quick math, then use the 20 million, and then you can kind of do it proportionally, because that's 40 million, 80 million. So in the 20 million scenario, what the potential savings is around $1.5 million. I'm now back to the.
Total savings is what we're looking at, yeah, $1.5 million to $2 million.
So to Mr. Finley's point, we're not saving 20 million, but out of that 20 million, we're saving $1 million and some change.
We're basically not paying interest.
That's right, and then you can 40 million in 2022 is twice that. If you just play the game of all things stay the same, and then the next year it's 4 times that, or 3 times that.
Yeah, now we tend to not wanna project too far out there with that,
Right.
but yes, you could kind of lay that in.
But this is a fact that these are callable in these dates. That's not a projection.
No.
That's a fact.
And those are based on where we are. We cannot, under the new tax law, we used to be able to do advance refundings, meaning we can refund issues before their call date, or in advance of their call date, and it would be on a tax exempt basis. Under the current law, that's not if you do an advance refunding, it would be taxable. Well, that's no benefit to us right now. That eliminates all our savings. But it becomes current within 90 days of the call date. So February 1, back up 90 days, November 1. So we can take this action as early as November and get this locked in if that's where we want to head with that.
Is there any reason to not do that?
I think regardless of which structure, you want to go ahead and get the savings and lock them in. We can still have the discussion about which structure along the way, but I think you move forward with the refunding.
So is it fair to say that that's kind of the next thing that the board needs to determine, and once that's over with, then in the spring, maybe at some point we go ahead, Wayne, and take a look at that 10-year plan and where that high school sits, and just while this is fresh in everybody's mind, have a conversation about when is it even doable or feasible is a good word.
Yeah.
When is it even feasible to consider that? Is that fair enough? Just in the spring, after we kind of get the M&O stuff done, is that?
So,
You'll know your enrollment situation.
Right. And we'll have projections, and, are we considering this? I think you've already moved it from May 19 to May 20, based on advice from the financial advisor, just saying, no way, no how, can't be done. So but really, there's a question between now and next spring, can we even do it in 20, or does it have to be 21? But we don't know the answer to that right now.
No.
We're still crunching numbers and trying to figure out. And that means to have the bond election, which then would mean, let's just say you've got it all designed ahead of time like the board has authorized in the past. How long is it before you can have that building open? 4 years? 4 years. So it'd be 2025 at the most ideal situation, if the bond was in 2021, and probably more like 2026.
probably 6.
Yeah.
Because of that cycle of the election, we'd have to determine when that is, and then that starts the clock.
And then in the midst of that is also a conversation about, then do you have an elementary out here that's brand new and beautiful and all that already full? Or do you have Sipple back at 1,000 and Cibolo Valley, all their portable, and you're having to build one in the other corner of the district? So can you squeeze an elementary? And then there's a matter of a junior high in there also.
Right.
And
That's what-
another intermediate. So you almost have to get one of each of those in this next,
You're talking 300 million.
I think easy. Easy. But you may have to break it in incrementally, and so we're gonna do this year, and then these 2 years later, and then this, now, structure the, and it may be that we've structured sales before where you don't go sell the whole thing, and Samco has helped us do that, where we do the sale over 2 or 3 years to make it work.
And I know all you know this, but as we're going into the legislative session again, and Dr. Gibson, I know you're fully aware, but districts such as you that have get IFA and EDA have been doing these refundings for the last umpteen years, and that savings also benefits, the IFA and EDA from the state. So they're paying out less every year because everybody's, you know, taking advantage of the lower interest rates and doing that, but they haven't continued keeping that level of payment up.
Yeah.
You saw how your percentage of state, effort on the INS side, so don't
It's
forget the
all-
INS side on state help too.
I mean, that's
Absolutely.
what I've learned through working with, the Westermans is, I mean, it's a box too, just like on the M&O side. You're in a box.
Yeah, and it's almost been diminished, so.
It's almost worth
No.
nothing now.
Whereas when they first put it in place, I felt like it was one of the more fair things that they ever scheduled because it was based on your wealth per student.
Right.
Your debt and your wealth per student. That is a very fair calculation, passed every kind of legal muster. And then I guess it was just such a good idea, they decided to defund it.
And that third dot two, under critical components, I think we talked about this too, is, when we did, how if the new Rose Garden, if they would have been funded, we only received $143,000 compared to the statute we're funded.
Yeah, so it's not just
And you know,
the existing debt, it's the
yes,
new
new, that's what I'm gonna say,
instructional.
We
the
just
new
got a new,
instructional.
formula template that's gone to 215, because they didn't put any extra money into the formula.
So the bill was passed and the press conference was done on $1,000 a kid.
And we're down to 215.
And now we're down to then they just defunded it, but they didn't do another press conference for the
Just
reduction.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Actually, oh my goodness, I just received a flyer from our senator touting that.
Really?
Yes, the same amount went to public schools. Charters. Yep, I read it. I was like, see that on the Rose Garden.
Is there anything more about this?
That's all I have unless there's any
Were they
additional.
listed in any order? Because I'm pretty sure a possible increase in INS tax rate is the last thing we're ever gonna.
Well,
I'm just thinking that might be the last.
I think we're trying to do everything we can to not have to do that, and, but it is always an option that we have between the 45 and 50 cents.
Yeah, and and I think what it'll boil down to in the spring is that year that you want that high school open. So if you can live with 6 more years of debt reduction and not open it, then you could probably not raise it. But if you wanted to accelerate that timeline of it getting open, you may have to put a couple of pennies extra in there. Is that fair to say?
That's fair, in our overall debt service, with the bond issues that, CIP programs you've gone through, our debt has been increasing, it's been staggered in to increase every year. Well, after this year, we're finally leveling off, where we're not continuing to increase, which that's gonna help as your values come up, that helps this particular situation next year and going forward, if that valuation growth comes.
So you're saying 2026, and it's 4 years open high school.
2022.
So how many students, 2021?
Well, 2021, 2022.
Yeah.
How many students would be still in Clemens by that time?
Well, if that projection table holds, we're looking at, I think it was 6,000 high school students by that time, so you'd have 2,000 per.
3,000.
3,000.
Three, the
Well,
original.
No, 2, if you go to 3 high schools, 2,
But-
4, and 6.
But
After
three,
construction.
but three, up to the time.
But if we don't, it'd have
Yeah.
3,000 per.
Exactly.
With
Till
the
the time
2
we get it.
current now,
Would
yes.
you stick out to, you stick out to parameter of at least 60% open school capacity, or M&O won't pay for it. So we have
Well,
to-
that's
Well,
the
you
older
could,
side that we have
you
to
could
look at.
structure them like other school districts do and have a 6A, a 5A, and a 4A.
Right.
You don't have to have them necessarily all.
Yeah, we may have to do a
In fact, you probably
phase
don't want them
one.
all equal.
Phase 1 and a phase 2 also, we may have to, which, it wasn't designed necessarily that way with steel, but it wound up being that way, which was okay. I mean, phase 1 was built and we added the wing on in phase 2. The kids came and the building came and we added the phase 2. So we may have to design this next one that way, just to do the phase 1 and open it.
We got some options to look at.
Yeah. And then Mr. Westbrook has asked me on D, I think I've overviewed this, so October is staffing and salary, and then November is, should it be EPP or should it be large expenditures? And then, because EPP, there's some familiarity. Let's go large expenditure.
I was thinking large expenditure, the only reason is planning
Right.
for if there need to be some phasing out or
Yeah.
something.
So we're gonna do.
Planning purposes would be the sooner the better for parents,
Yes.
public, everybody.
So large expenditures then will be November, and then EPP will be December.
Yeah,
Just keeps getting
salary-
better and better for
we got salary compensation in December.
Salary, compensation, and staffing will be combined in October because they all go together so clearly. I mean, they fall together, same conversation.
The EPP backs up in December.
EPP in December, and then large expenditures in November. Are they good with that?
We're not waiting on the roofing for us to go through these 3 months, right?
That's on
That's
the
on the
September board agenda.
So large expenditures and efficiencies would be November
Yes.
together?
Yes.
Just like salary and staffing is together, salary compensation, staffing?
Well, thank you. The efficiencies, we'll just, and Linda, would you please make sure Paige hears this, she stepped out with the Westmans, that I think we just need to touch on efficiencies at every single meeting.
Yeah.
You just make that part
I
of
think
every
there's
meeting.
efficiencies in all those areas, and
Yeah,
that's
That's
what
exactly right. So we.
Well, that was part of my earlier question was,
We do. I appreciate you bringing that up. We need to cover those efficiencies at every single meeting.
All right.
Dr. Gibson, I should throw out to you just, I mean, we're having these extra meetings, we're spending this extra time, and we're diving into the budget. I mean, hopefully from a public relations standpoint, we can get that message to the community that you guys are taking extra effort to look at the budget, cut back where necessary, so that, TRE does come up next year, public's already conditioned to realize we've gone through this for a while.
Correct. Absolutely.
Is that gonna be, you mentioned that all that, the
Yeah,
public can
so
see as well?
our intention is to go ahead and just start a web link off of our website that just shares what we go through at every single meeting, just the entire packet, so that the community can see kind of I couldn't help but smile at the football game when the blog came out. There's my smiling faces with the headline, "Tough choices ahead."
yeah,
I don't
what
know.
were you smiling about?
Yeah, it just didn't seem to.
That's what I thought
but
too.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. You
I
pulled the
said-
picture that you had.
I
get
said to
it.
myself, what's he smiling about?
Yeah, but to
You know
your
something I don't
point,
know?
to your point though, that that was an attempt to try to communicate that we've got to go through this, and we are going through this, and we're going to do it together as a team.
Well, I know we were here an hour longer than y'all had planned, and I know y'all have been here a long day, and I appreciate all the conversation. I think it's been very beneficial.
I appreciate you saying that, and I would rather just go ahead and plan on 2 hours. If we finish earlier, let's do it, and us not leave any rock not unturned, and let's have the conversations, and let's just plan on moving forward that way.
I will give the public an opportunity for comments. This comment should be limited to topics such as policies, curriculum, and facilities, and not last longer than 5 minutes. Mr. Dolford, you have anything to say? Any comments, concerns?
Nothing except that I stayed an extra hour more than I planned to stay.
Thank you for coming, Dr. Petrisky. Anything more?
We're following pretty much what the book is talking about.
We discussed at the very beginning, making sure information gets to everybody in a timely manner at the beginning of the process. And that was a similar buy-in to what we're doing in the district.
I think I would just like to say thank you to everybody in this room. I have two daughters that graduated in the school district. I have a son and a stepson currently going to Steele. And I appreciate the work that you guys have done. My kids have received an awesome education. And it's because of the people in this room that set things up for the teachers. And anyway, I appreciate everything you guys do.
That's all, civilian, public?
We got no more civilians.
No more public comments. That's it, we'll be adjourned. Comments?
6:58.
6:58.